Hello and welcome to my phenomenal conversation with Dave Hampton. Yet to be titled, but I'm thinking something along the lines of eco-spiritual activist. But we'll see what emerges out of the conversation. But before I get Dave to introduce himself, I'm just going to say a little bit about Phenomenal Conversations. So Phenomenal Conversations attempt to co-create regenerative worlding and regenerative culture. And we do this by interviewing change makers that are living the change, like Dave. We also try to amplify imagination in the midst of the polycrisis, ask meaningful questions, and amplify nuance and subtlety in a changing, chaotic world. So that being said, there are two formats. One of the format is this one-on-one interview that I'm doing with Dave right at this moment. And then another format is a live podcast format where we have a collective conversation about the issues and insights raised by the change maker, and we go into group discussion and try and harvest the best of the collective wisdom. So that's live largely every last Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m. European time. So watch out for announcements for that and follow the podcast to hear from other change makers. So very, very grateful to have you here today, Dave. And we have a bit of a shared history. We won't go into that so much because I think your life has really been a representation of some of the seismic changes in the world, and the way that you've engaged with it, I think, is incredibly inspiring. And I'm sure people would love to hear it. Before we go into the detail of, some of those milestones and achievements and highs and lows of your life's journey, could you give us a bit of background and, what you did before you got into the world of sustainability? So then that's where we'll kind of talk about your life's journey.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you so much. And phenomenal conversations is quite a hat to grow into, isn't it? My head's big enough already, and thank you for your kind words. I suppose I started life in Essex. I was born in Essex, and in a small house in a posh town, if that makes sense. My dad was an architect, mum was a teacher, both gone. My mum left us last year, and I discovered that I was really good at maths. A lot of things came easy for me. I'm talking about like teens at this stage. And thinking about what I'd say today, one thing I thought was just how easy a lot of things came to me in the early days. It took me till I was in my 60s to realize that that's called privilege, and that's called, that's called being lucky. But I kind of submitted to the much more enjoyable version that I was just very good at stuff. And that carried me along for a while. I think I had a bit of a tortured mind, which again, with the benefit of a lot of hindsight, was probably undiagnosed dyslexia. The whole neurodiversity thing was going on, but would never have been thought of or discussed. My dad was probably undiagnosed depressive. I don't think I've ever said that on camera before, so maybe I'll get in trouble for that from some higher power. But yeah, I think he probably was. So what I'm trying to say is it was simultaneously a very happy childhood and simultaneously the opposite. And I got quite good at masking things.
Yeah.
Which is kind of ironic because one of those undiagnosed things I had as well was, and I am trying to be funny here and not being disrespectful, a kind of version of Tourette's. I would say extreme truths, sometimes with extreme rage and volume behind them, but also knowing that I had to mask. So yeah, a lot going on, and I won't make this incredibly long, but long story short, because of maths and physics coming so easy to me, I got into Cambridge. I had a grandfather on my mum's side was incredibly supportive, loved me, and spent a lot of time with that maternal home, doing things that I wasn't allowed to do at home. And yeah, I loved him dearly, and he drove me up to Cambridge to get my interview, and then he died within months of that. So he never knew that I got my place, which was I found him in his car. He had an old Rover, as grandfathers did in those days, and found him dead in his car. I had to go out on my moped
Wow.
because he didn't come home, and he was 6 hours late, and he was already stiff. So for an 17-year-old, it was quite a thing.
Yeah.
I don't know why I mentioned that. I suppose these are the things that make us who we are.
Yeah.
Cambridge. I had been an electronics club nerd. I'd been very amateur radio. The school had combined cadet corps, so I was playing soldiers is what we now call it, dressing up. But I didn't like that. And my dad was a CND pacifist, so was mum.
Okay.
So they didn't like that. But I
Yeah.
did get into the signals hut as a way of escaping the chasing each other with rifles bit,
Mm.
and that was really enjoyable. But I still wasn't in my body. That's the reason for this
Mm.
um, long intro is Cambridge. I had to escape from all of this, and I found rowing. I found the river. I loved the river. I was guided gently into a boat,
Yeah.
and as a lot of youngsters who are nerds, I suppose, and absolutely adored it. And the college
Mm.
boatman was a very huge influence on my life. Paul
Right.
Collins died about 5 years ago. Motor neuron disease, effectively killed himself. Another big event. But yeah, he kind
Mm.
of took me under his wing, and in terms of all the things that made me, I took up rowing in a big way, and after Cambridge, went on 2 more years training beating myself to death with early morning outings, and rowing's a tough sport, and ended
Yeah.
up rowing for GB in 1982 in the lightweight team, but the
All
same
right.
era as Steve Redgrave. So I was
You're
there and thereabouts.
a contemporary of Steve Redgrave.
I like to
Did you
say that
row at
now.
the Olympics then?
The Olympics only had lightweight rowing
Oh,
as a
okay.
category from 90, I know the date, of course, 1996.
Right.
So I
So you
was
represented GB at
GB,
other, yeah.
exactly, at World Champs.
And then how did you get from champion rowing into sustainability? Like, because it wasn't that back, it was hardly even a concept back then. I mean, it was like the early 90s that it started to gain traction. So how did you transition from sport into sustainability?
Yeah, thank you. Well, sport was the escape, I think. I think
Yeah.
that kind of love of nature was already there, but probably quite suppressed. I had pictures of all the different species of birds in my bedroom.
Oh, right.
The RSPB had some posters, and as a neurodiverse person would be, I knew all their names. Since forgotten them all, but
Yeah.
memory is a thing for me now. In case
Mm.
I say the same thing twice at the end of the interview, but I'm sure you'll bear with me. So the sport was like the release and the relief. It came late. It came late in life. On paper, it was like a bumblebee. No one told the bumblebee it couldn't fly. No one told me I couldn't row for GB, and I did it against the odds because most people coming into Cambridge have already done a lot of sport.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd done a lot of other walking, and I kept myself in good shape. But
Mm.
um, so sport to sustainability, I think the threads, and there's quite a few threads. One is actually breathing, weirdly, and
Mm.
I'm reminding myself to breathe in this moment.
Mm.
But the thermodynamic process engineers would talk about of conversion of energy can't
Mm.
be matter can't be created or destroyed, energy can't be created or destroyed. It's just exchanges.
Yeah.
When you burn fossil fuel or when you burn calories from food, you create carbon dioxide. That's we
Yeah.
breathe in oxygen, out comes CO2. So that was kind of very innate. And my very first job, while I was still rowing, and I agonized over who I should work for. And I remember my mum's telling me, she said, "Well, I know you want to be a Quaker, it does good stuff, but if you join the nuclear arms establishment, whatever it was at the time, you can
Mm.
change it from within." And so
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to do that. You adults change yourselves from without, please. And so I found British Gas, which sounds a bit ironic after what I've just said, but they had research labs and they were public utility back then. And they genuinely convinced me that they wanted to burn less gas. So I was working on energy efficient appliances of the future.
Oh,
A
okay. Yeah.
little exploding gas fire I had with a glass
Mm.
front and a plastic flue chimney pipe, which they loved because you could install it into what we used to call Barratt homes, cheap
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
little ticky-tacky homes. So I loved that, but it was a sinecure. It was a flexi time. Didn't really have to show up at all. And within 8 years or so, I'd worked out they didn't really want us to succeed. And
Right.
British Gas
Okay.
was privatized while I was there.
Yeah.
So I bought some shares, and that story, the early Thatcher years privatizations, left soon after that. But I'd already got CO2 in my body by then. And there is a point to this strange story, because in the labs, if you had a big boiler and you were measuring the efficiency of how it worked, all you have to do, and this is quite surprising, is take two measurements: the temperature of the gas going up the chimney and the CO2 percentage of the gas going up the percentage. And it's not like in ppm; it's in percent. And 9 or 10% means that the boiler is working very efficiently. It's got the right amount of air going in. And like an athlete, you want the process to eke out the last little bit, last little microwatt, because that's how you win races. But before you did the experiment, you had to set the zero, and the zero on this extremely sophisticated measurement was 0.03%. So it's hardly on the scale. But 0.03 is what we now talk about as 300 parts per million.
Yeah.
That was in the 80s, and now it's 420. So the air we breathe, it's like if we were in a conference hall, the air would be full of CO2, but because we're outdoors, we don't notice. But when people ask me why it's so important, I think the combination of having to breathe, having to have good lungs, efficient lungs. I mean, they do VO2 max, they do measurements, they prick your ear and measure your blood to work out how efficient you're working as an engine in a unit, power unit in a boat. And that was the thread really was efficiency of conversion of precious asset fossil fuel into lazy lifestyles. Quite a cynical view, but that's roughly what it is. We have thousands of energy slaves. I'm not sure if that concept is helpful anymore, but thousands of humans working away so that one privileged person can fly away to the Azores.
Okay, so where did you start off as? That sounds like the kind of you had the scientific background on carbon emissions before it was probably even a term, before it was even recognized as being important or dangerous. So how did that morph into, because I first met you, you already had a career and you were launching as having your own business. So what was the transition until you went sole proprietor, as it were?
Yeah, thank you. I suppose because I'm 66, it's quite a long story.
That's why I always ask for older people like us, I always ask the bio to be short.
Yeah. Oh, I was loving it. The nuance of and it's fun. Thank you for this opportunity. Hopefully some of it might, the other end might make some sense as well for me, for you, for anyone who tunes in. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And back then it was very much mechanical efficiency. It was what makes the boat go faster. Literally, there's a whole school of lucrative management consultancy called that. What makes the boat go faster? And for me, it's what makes the planet last longer would be now. So it was in the summarizing it, from energy efficiency, got a job with a government agency that was doing a lot of work in that regard. And you mentioned, look, CO2, we hadn't worked out it was dangerous. That's absolutely the truth. And we were under strong instructions from the government client never to suggest that there was any link between burning fossil fuel and, well, I think we were even told not to, global warming wasn't a thing. This is So the focus was very much energy, and then that became seen as being part of the environmental responsibility piece, clean green living, and this is still 80s. And it wasn't until the 90s that I started working on a broader piece through the buildings industry on a green label that could summarize an entire office block's performance. So building A is BREEAM Excellent. It's called BREEAM.
I've heard of that.
Platinum, gold, and silver, and fail. And
so basically, you were kind of early adopter before even sustainability and energy efficiency had become buzzwords. So, and BREEAM standards were one of the earliest official measures of sustainability, I think, and was one of the earliest that I can remember or that I'm aware of.
Yes.
So And of course, let's get into your more general journey through the sustainability from, awareness of carbon and energy and sustainable buildings. What would you say were, important moments for you that were helped you develop or grow or whatever in that journey, and then things that maybe were a couple of setbacks, so we can get a kind of picture of the contrasts of that stage of your life.
Yeah, no, it's great. I haven't used the patriarchy word yet, and but I did kind of allude to the fact that when I was young, I didn't realize that I was the beneficiary of so much.
Yeah, yeah,
And I want to mention that because I think the job that I got heading up the Bream team
yeah.
in 1995, I'd been doing another government job before that, but I got a promotion above, what's that one about, being promoted above your competence?
But
I think it
yeah,
was
yeah,
probably the patriarchy with hindsight that got me that job.
yeah.
I remember a dear lady that worked for me that should have had the job and who was quite angry a lot of the time. I didn't really know why. And no one took me aside and said, Dave, and that's the benefit of a lot of therapy later in life.
Yeah,
So sustainability kind of replaced environment and everything else. Then it kind of went down the other side because it got eroded as a concept, as a word. But you're
yeah.
absolutely right. I mean, I used to say I was one of the first sustainability consultants.
Really? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, back, and certainly in the field of sustainable operation of buildings, there wasn't very much going on. So the company I was part of, ABS Consulting, we talked about sustainable FM and the whole
Yeah.
facilities management community. It wasn't a radio station.
No.
And ABS weren't breaks, but yeah, it was early days and it was groundbreaking, and facilities managers loved it.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
kind of inherently knew that something was wrong with the way they were being commanded
Yeah.
to run the assets of the rich and powerful.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah. Yeah.
tends to be the way the world of property works. There are
Yeah.
property owners and property managers, and they
Yeah.
don't. It's a bit like landlord tenants. There's no justice in that world.
And
The question now.
the what would you say? Do you have any light bulb moments at that time,
Thank
or
you.
what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know I will have done. I know there are probably some that might still come to me, but
Yeah.
it was actually the reverse of that you mentioned that was
Yeah.
interesting me. It was kind of like the disillusionment process.
Yeah.
I think people
Okay.
often talk about how
So
much
that began early for
it.
you.
I suppose it depends who's measuring. I mean, Greta Thunberg at
Yeah.
17 says, "Where are the adults?"
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm moved even repeating those words because it
Yeah.
feels like throughout my life that question has been, "Where are the bleep adults?"
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
With some rage,
Yeah.
some outrage.
Yeah.
And I suppose, yeah, in some respects, I got disillusioned early. In some respects, I've only just caught up with where Greta is at 17, and
Yeah. Yeah.
huge
Yeah.
respect for her sitting outside Swedish Parliament with a sign and every Friday. I mean, it's
Yeah.
the shame that I think all humans should feel that she has to do that for us all. It is a kind of crucifixion. I know that goes way too far, and Easter's
Mm.
coming up, but that she has to. I know there's other things going on in the world, and Palestine in
Yeah.
particular, I'm thinking of. But
Yeah.
the fact that a young girl can speak truth to power, and when she was asked for her proof, I think the previous administration asked her, okay, so you're giving evidence to the committee. What we'll ask you the first question. We'll take it slowly in a very patronising way. I
Yeah.
don't know if she physically lifted it onto the desk, but metaphorically, she said, "Well, here are the reports of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
COP process from the last 30 years. Read them."
Yeah. Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
words, not hers, but
Yeah.
it's not my evidence, it's yours. This has
Yeah.
come from growing up science. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I'm a huge fan of hers, as you can probably imagine.
So you spoke about a kind of, sustainability um, becoming a buzzword, or the meaningfulness of it being degraded even early on.
Yes.
So when we met, you were turning to an interest in spirituality and inner
Mm.
work. How
Mm.
did that? I'm curious if you'd like to explain to people how that confluence of things came about.
Yeah. What was these phenomenal conversations, aren't they? It's called, yeah. I love to laugh because otherwise, I think I came to you in the window and to spirituality almost in desperation because
Yeah,
from the whole "Where are the adults" piece,
yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
well, where are the gods?
yeah,
Where
yeah,
else can be trusted?
yeah,
And I probably wasn't in the greatest of health there because that disillusionment process, once it kicked in and once sustainability word became hijacked to make more money, whereas actually it was about not making money, it was about balancing the
yeah,
economy with the ecology
yeah,
and with social justice. And suddenly sustainable was sustainable profits. And whoa,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah,
and I saw that with various other things as well. We had a program called Eco Homes
yeah,
before Eco Homes was a word.
yeah.
And then the government trashed the whole idea. Not just the government. I don't want to sound too bitter and cynical, but the government plus the press, plus the Daily Mail.
The
Mhm.
stakeholders and
Yeah, yeah.
the people,
Billionaires.
donors.
Yeah. The vulture capitalist, I've been
Yeah,
told to
yeah,
call it instead of neoliberalism, but
yeah,
being told doesn't sound right. I've been encouraged to. Spirituality. Yeah, I was groping in the dark for something to trust, and um, for whatever reason, with quite a distrust embedded in my body, but also a magnetism. So I was ripe for being caught by gurus, and
right. Okay.
and and there are a lot of them, and I followed a lot and got a lot from them. But I do always describe myself as polyfaith and none. I am Buddhist, I am Quaker, I am Christian,
Yeah,
and I'm also atheist and pagan. And
yeah,
I know that sounds greedy, but it's quite important for me, I think, not to give away my agency or my own um, bodily sovereignty
yeah,
over the years. And I don't know if the right time to mention it is now, but I started following a man called Mac McCartney in
yeah,
2008. He came to one of the Be the Change conferences
yeah,
in the Quaker Hall in Westminster. Not the Quaker Hall, the first one was the Quaker Hall. And I was just blown away because he had this kind of man's masculine energy and was
yeah,
strong and looked as if he'd come out of some boxing fights and survived it. And that was the first time what I regarded as spirituality, nature, sustainability, doing the right thing, ethics, morals. First time
yeah,
I'd seen that being held up by a man, which
yeah,
sounds pretty shocking. Why?
yeah,
Where are the adults? Where are the male? There are a
yeah,
lot of women working on in the sphere of doing the right thing, but very few men. So I kind of fell in love with him. Went down to see his place, Embercombe in Devon, and been devoted. And he is now, I think for what's the word for full disclosure, he is my mentor at the moment.
yeah, yeah.
His uh, track for 5 years, it's called Kith and Kin, and
Mm,
Embercombe itself does it is I was going to say it's a spiritual adventure, but Mac himself doesn't really like or use the spiritual word. It's
mm,
more about the spiritual path being what you end up doing when you live with care and with respect.
yeah, yeah,
Those things, and suddenly you become spiritual. But I think Native Americans don't have a word for spirituality or God or
yeah,
belief. No, it's belief they don't have a word for because it's like, well, we don't have to believe in anything. We're in heaven. We're
yeah, yeah,
surrounded with
yeah,
beauty
yeah.
and life, and it's all sacred, and earth is sacred. So what? Why the need for any belief? It's in front of our eyes, and we have to care for it.
Well, it sounds really, really interesting. I think I was at the same event when Mac was there.
Ah, yeah.
Um, I was curious about how that gave you some balance of stability in the face of the kind of misappropriation of green consciousness, you could say, or the will to do good for the planet. How did that help balance that, the wounding of that?
Wow. Yeah, great question. I really appreciate you, Dave, because yeah, you listen and yeah, I really appreciate the questions and the way you're listening. I want to try to do justice to that. I mean, a major part of the story. which I'm only thinking now when I'm looking at the timeline, is I was diagnosed with depression in 2003, so that was before a lot of this.
Yeah.
Still, my wife and I got married the same year I gave up rowing, so the whole rowing story like came to a grinding halt, and I told the selectors, if you're not going to behave like adults, common theme,
Yeah. Yeah.
sleep, and got married and discovered like real life and fun, and it was great. And then started having kids in 1990. I know this sounds like a long-winded detour. I don't think it is. I'll speed it up a fraction. But I've got to follow my own little river of thought as
Threads.
well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm just wanting to emphasize how much of a mess I was at that
Yeah.
time. I was
Yeah.
getting a huge salary at the end of the 90s and at the
Yeah.
beginning of the 2000s. I was company director, sustainability. Again, it was all coming really easy. Clients were coming to us
Yeah.
wanting to pay big rates, but I thought this isn't it. But having and the catchphrase for that is people flying off to climate conferences. Something
Yeah. Yeah.
in that phrase
Yeah.
is not just funny to me, but also savagely wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can get a bit hung up on all that, but
Yeah.
so I think I answered your question by saying like I was a mess. I also got rescued by another beautiful place, Schumacher College, in the
Oh
2000s.
yeah. 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 Yeah.
Doing courses on business and sustainability. I went
Yeah.
back 4 times. I'm like an addict.
Yeah.
And I got to sit and speak and learn from some of the greatest. Tessa Tennant, before she passed away, Amory Lovins. I should be able to reel off many more names, but
Yeah.
Richard
Yeah. Yeah.
Pro, but
That was a
this
real
was like a
hub
high
of
dose. Yeah,
green innovation and
yeah.
sane sustainability.
And a bit of dignity as well.
Yeah.
Having breakfast with Satish Kumar and everyone being equal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I think there's a kind of Quaker thing running through this as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
rightly or wrongly. Yeah,
So you were basically saying that you weren't in good shape, but then the encounter with Embocum and spirituality helped compensate some of the wounds or
yeah.
dissonance you were feeling.
I
That's what I'm
think
hearing anyway.
it's powerful because I don't think I've been in therapy. I don't think I've visited some of this territory. So this is
No.
this is real time. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think Embicum started to maybe dress the wounds or
Yeah.
acknowledge the wounds or help me to
Acknowledge.
acknowledge
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
wounds.
Yeah.
Which is a very humbling place to be because up until then, there was masking on a scale of supreme mastery. I could
Yeah.
mask
Yeah.
all that was going on underneath, and I did climate comedy. I was one of the first people to do
Oh,
stand-up climate comedy, but,
all
but
right.
it was to ease my own pain
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I did that. And the
But
carbon,
the
carbon, 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 carbon comedian. Sorry. Yeah.
very funny. But also the privilege, in some ways, they're most skilled at masking because
I think
actually
so.
there isn't enough tension in the system or enough breakdown that you can skillfully mask and
Wow.
not be accessible. So
Wow.
I think those
Yeah.
two things are linked.
Yeah. And the breakdown is the breakthrough, and you're fighting to avoid the breakdown.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So if we move on a little bit, you were mentioning about, how rowing and nature, rowing connected you to your body. You love being on the water and in the boat,
Mm.
and you were kind of international standard yourself. So how did that all coalesce into you founding Champions for the Earth? You want to say a little bit about what that
Yeah.
is and what they do?
Yeah. Thank you. It's big for me. And again, I'm trying to look at the timeline of all this. I do remember even in the 90s having the thought that there must be some kind of a connection between what I used to do and what I'm now doing.
Yeah,
And I would
yeah,
chat with bright civil servants about, being one crew and teamwork and
yeah, 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 yeah.
and nothing popped up. So it's been on simmer, I think, since I stopped rowing. Because cut a long story short, if I can, and I always say that and I don't, but when someone like Steve Redgrave retired after his fifth gold,
Yeah,
I was kind of there, not literally, I was there for one
mm,
of the golds.
yeah,
I was kind of there for him.
mm,
He was heavyweight, I was a lightweight, I was slightly
mm,
older,
mm,
and really caring for what I was watching because he could win a gold medal and give a brilliant interview And then within 3 hours packing the boats away, he could look as if he'd just lost all of his family. It
Right.
was a kind of tragic response.
Mm.
And I recognized that one, that kind of elation, and then the emptiness. Didn't
Yeah.
think I'm still not enough. You know, there's the song "Never Enough."
Yeah.
A lot of athletes have that never enough thing running.
Yeah.
And he
Even
got
though
5
they've
goals.
excelled and achieved the peak of their profession,
Yeah,
there's a hollowness inside.
there's a hollowness.
Yeah.
And I got really lucky. 2017, there's a company called Lane 4 who I want to credit and thank. They were local. They were just down the road. Adrian Morehouse, the swimmer who still does Olympic swimming commentary, was the
Yeah.
founder, and he was taking the lessons from sport into business. Oh,
Yeah.
promising. And I saw this advert on LinkedIn for an athlete transition program. I thought, gosh, is this changing gender? Or, sorry, the comedy is cheap. Is transition, and the word transition was coming up at that time as well.
Yeah. Transition meant something else back then.
Something, yeah, or it could do, but
Yeah.
the comedy is the mask.
Mm.
So I saw this course, and it was like recent Olympians only should apply. But I thought, I really want to go on this course. This is the course for me. I need this. And it said how to apply, and you fill in your email, and it sounds like too much detail. And then it said to send a few words about why you think you should be on it, and sent off the connection details at 6.
Even though it must have been 20 years before.
Yeah, I knew I didn't.
You still hadn't felt you hadn't transitioned in a way.
I hadn't processed any of it.
Yeah.
I hadn't processed any of it. It was like I'd severed a limb and I pretended I still had a limb. The depth of the sacrifice, and it's a strong word, but the depth, and it's not giving your life on the battlefield. In context, I get it, but it's as close as a lot of us get to that level of sacrifice with
well, it's sort of monastic.
Yeah.
Spirit, it's sportful monasticism.
Wow. There's definitely a spiritual thing to it. And some sport athletes come out the other side gracious and fulfilled and supremely happy, but a lot don't. There's a real price tag, particularly to modern sport and the Olympics. Sport. So filled out the little detail thing, and you have to remember that, because the next bit, and then it said say a few words. I wrote about 8 pages of my life story, a bit like that. And the guy phoned, Rick Cochran phoned me, and he said, oh yeah, I was just filling out the form. I was very nervous, and I knew that I couldn't get on this program because I'd read the blurb.
Yeah.
And he said, oh well, maybe we can have a chat and I can save you the bother.
Yeah.
And I heard this as rejection and failure, and his polite way of saying, you're not on it, Dave.
Yeah.
20 minutes later, we were still talking, and he said, well, I'll see you next week then. I was like, what? I'm on it? And I was I fitted his requirements, and I suppose this is what happens to you if you don't get it right. Thanks for laughing.
Hey guys, don't do this.
Yeah. This is the exhibit B. And I loved it. And we did our intros, and he said just first name and sport with 16 people in a big room in a circle. And we got halfway round by lunchtime. Sport wasn't an option, and I'm kind of demonstrating that now.
Yeah.
But
so were you the oldest in that group?
I love to think that there was one. I think there was a gymnast. Yeah, she'd done gym with the best, not Olga Korbut, but with a famous, and she might listen and watch this one day, and I love you. And I think, we were both in a bad place. And this guy, Rick, lifted us with a kind of Buddhist philosophy and like what happens after sport. And I think I've got to the point now. It's like, if that is such a big thing that you've left behind, this football and the goalposts and the discipline and the commitment and the spirituality of your sport.
But also the full-hearted engagement, because it's like the mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, whether you believe in it or not, your total full-bodied dedication to excellence, then what's on the other side of that?
That's it. You've completely got it.
So you haven't quite nailed this Champions for Earth. So
I will. This is it.
Please, we have limited time, so please tell us about Champions for Earth and what they do and why this is the backstory to how it's found,
It
but
is a
tell us a little
backstory,
bit of
and the
it. Yeah, yeah,
punchline is very quick and very simple.
yeah,
So
yeah,
you're empty after this, and
yeah,
you had a football-sized heart
yeah, yeah.
was fulfilling you. That disappears. You replace that with an earth. So
Oh,
you
okay.
were champion of the world, and you
Yeah,
become a champion for the earth.
right.
And
So
it's
that
just,
was your key insight for
yeah,
these sports people as a way to get them focused on something big
well,
other than
seeing
their
seeing
sport.
current athletes who literally got gold in 2012
Yeah,
already starting to experience that, and one of them came over to me and said, "Hey, I heard your intro. I want to be part of it." And we
great.
co-founded
Yeah,
it. That was Etienne Stott, who got the first, I think it was the first gold for Britain 2012 in the
I
K.
remember it. Yeah, the
Yeah,
was it kayak
that's
or
it.
canoe?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And it was against the odds. They weren't the favourites, but
yeah,
they did
yeah.
it. So,
So
and the
how
rest is
many
history.
champions have you got at the moment?
Yeah, we don't like to kind of say if you're in or you're without.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
kind of, and the number might sound quite small. There's
Yeah.
about just over 20 who are really
20.
committed to the journey,
Yeah.
and we don't name them all,
No.
but there's a list who go to first for, and we have a manifesto which is how we see, and it's public. That was launched at the last year at the Olympics Paris.
Oh, brilliant.
But it's
We
very
were,
soft and fluffy, and there's no real structure. And some of your, if anyone watches this, might so, people will watch this, but whoever watches it, um, it's like a really precious little seed that if any money got involved, or if any egos or corporate philosophies got involved, I think it would go. And it's
yeah,
at the end of the day, it's simply, are you prepared to, as a Quaker would, stand up with a policeman and say, this is not okay.
yeah, yeah.
Not in my name.
So it's a grouping, a kind
Loose
of,
grouping, yeah.
yeah, a loose grouping of champions, and each one does it their own campaigning, activism, environmentalism in their own way, in their own sphere of interest, whether whether it was their sport or not. Is that
Yes,
whether it was, whether they
yes,
were a horse rider, they might be active in something else. But for example,
exactly that.
yeah,
You've got it. And everyone's on in their own page of the journey, and everyone is kind of raising their game though, because of
yeah,
the innate competitive nature of what they used to do. It's
yeah,
like when they see one of their teammates speak out and say something on the BBC that, so
yeah,
it's a lifting, and not just of two individuals, but of a whole community. And I'm sure you're aware of this, but whenever a top athlete attempts to say anything about anything outside of their sphere of the
yeah,
sport, the
yeah,
BBC clamp down on them like a ton of bricks.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Um, Lizzie Arnold, who was the downhill skeleton
yeah, yeah, yeah,
gold, she got a second gold medal, she said, "Well, it's in a wooden box, and I'm an environmentalist." And you could hear the thing in the earpiece saying, "Get her off the subject. Change something."
yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah, yeah,
exaggerating,
yeah, yeah,
if you have influence, you are trained over your lifetime to be obedient to the voices that say, "Do not say anything."
yeah, yeah. Well, you're also highly trainable in that because
Yeah, true.
that's what you're doing.
Yeah,
So, if we move on from that, then Dave, I'm also conscious that you also took these beliefs and ideas and you tested them in the spiritual, no, the spiritual, the political domain. And I think did you stand at least twice to be an MP?
yeah,
And
yes.
just tell us a
Sorry,
little
no.
bit about what
Once,
you learned about that and how, like, there's standing and there's protesting, but actually being a part of the political system and standing for the Green Party sort of takes all of your background to a different level and in possibly tough encounters with the public. How was that? And tell us about that element of your life.
this is a phenomenal conversation for me. I just hope it is for others. Thank you. Yeah, the politics came before Champions for Earth in
Yeah,
chronology,
yeah.
but not in anything else. So I stood for the Green Party in Beaconsfield, is the seat.
And
I live
that's
in Marlow, and Marlow comes
sometimes
under Beaconsfield.
liberal, but mostly conservative, isn't it, Beaconsfield?
Almost entirely conservative. Yeah,
Oh,
well,
right, okay.
Dominic Grieve, who
Yeah, oh
became
yeah, he
so,
was a big beast in the Tory party at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, and stood against Brexit and
Oh
lost.
yeah, got
He
kicked
he
out.
had probably one of the biggest majorities in the country
Mm,
and decided um, to stay true to his principles on that. I mean, he didn't always. He went with the whips on most issues, and his
mm,
voting record gave me enough mileage to say, well, when I took him on at the hustings head to head, which
mm.
wasn't comfortable or easy because I wanted to be gracious, but there was also a bit of me wanting to land a resounding blow.
Yeah,
But he lost his seat,
yeah,
an honourable man, and lots of local parties stood down and supported him. But still, he was replaced by one of Boris's favourites, and I then potentially get into political trouble. But
yeah,
all of that is true. So that was 2015. I'd dabbled in local politics before, and I'd heard a
yeah,
talk from Transition Town saying it doesn't matter which party you go for, just stand for local council, so you get some
yeah,
some leverage. So I
yeah.
did that, and I'm still backing some people locally that are doing that. Yeah,
So what would you say was some key, because in if people don't know the English political system,
mm,
if an actor, a parliamentarian has a significant majority in an area, it's almost impossible to overturn. So you're already on a hiding to nothing there. So
yeah,
you took on the impossible. What do you think were the things that were, most useful or valuable to you taking that mission on?
yeah. Thank you, because there's some sadness coming from your questions and answering them all in one go. It's an experience this end. I hope it's.
Well, I hope we're not too compact, although I'm giving you a lot of
Oh,
latitude to
you are.
respond.
No, it's not that. It's. I think it's seeing the extent to which I had to delude myself
Oh,
in order
okay.
to do the things I did that I thought needed to be done.
Yeah,
Because the
yeah,
story I had at the time was to try and show people that anyone could stand. It was like
yeah, yeah,
it was like, and I think in your notes, David and Goliath,
yeah.
I don't agree with the Tory. I'm gonna, who's with me? And then I look behind and there wasn't anyone. It's like,
Mm, mm,
okay, I thought I was doing this for all of you.
yeah,
A bit of ego got in the way as well, but so the story was to help ease the process and remind us all, perhaps that's a better word, like so that we remembered and regenerated and realized that politics wasn't out there.
yeah,
Politics was life, and that politics it was us, and that we had to stand. So it was almost like a sacrificial. Well, I'm going to.
yeah,
I did get beaten up quite bad. The process was more painful than I thought,
yeah,
and that almost undoes what I was trying to do. Because I was trying to say, well, it's easy, anyone can do it, and it
yeah.
ain't. It's not. It's not.
No, it's
And
brutal. Let's
it's
just,
brutal, and
it's
if you
brutal.
got
It's not
thick-skinned,
nice. Yeah.
yeah. So I think a bit of abuse
And in fact,
occurred.
as an aside to that, I think this was about the time you were standing that Jeremy Corbyn was getting a bit of uplift in the
Yeah.
Labour Party, and I became an associate member because I knew him and
Ah,
respected him.
ah,
But I couldn't become a full member. Do you know why? Because I liked or supported you standing. I'd put they trawled through my social media posts and
no.
rejected me from membership of the Labour Party because there was you and a much younger woman that was very active as well that was standing for the Green Party. So I got rejected for my support of the Green Party.
Wow. Wow.
And I'm a marginal player. I hardly ever get
Mm,
involved in politics. So then moving on, Dave, you then that passion for, a healthy earth didn't go anywhere despite, the massive disappointment and pain.
mm,
And you then became, I remember seeing your posts on Facebook and Instagram, like very active in, I think it was Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil or that whole
yeah,
protest phase. And
yeah,
you were doing actions and picketing and all sorts. Tell us
yeah.
about, how you kept going despite all the knockbacks and, what the experience of doing that was like for you. Because really, you're a veteran of the Green movement by this time, by 5, 10 years ago. You're an elder in the movement almost.
I suppose, and the School of Hard Knocks people often joke about, but it certainly felt that way on and off. I don't want to be like, playing for sympathy too much, but it wasn't. A lot of it wasn't easy for me,
No, of
where I
course it
was.
wasn't.
So XR, there was a declaration that I can't quite put a date on, 2018, October 2018, I think, and partly because of the circle of friends like yourself who had been giving me soft, subtle support. And there's one guy who saved my life who said, Dave, another Dave, three Daves, he said, Dave, just because they're listening doesn't mean they're not listening. And it's like, what? What do you mean? What is it? Just because they're not listening doesn't mean they're not listening. Okay. And that
Mm.
helped me, pick myself up a bit.
Yeah.
But XR, I didn't think I was going to like. It was very much duty. Arrived in Parliament Square for the declaration. Flags were waving. All my friends were there. It's like
Yeah, of
all the
course.
people
Yeah.
I've met over the years. And then someone said, well, very politely, we're just going to cross over the road from Parliament Square to Westminster, to the Parliament building,
Yeah.
just very slowly because there's a lot of us. And this is hard to believe now because activism and civil disobedience has it moved on, or was it always like that? But I didn't know it was happening. I don't know, but I wasn't aware of that, and neither were most of the people there. And as we walked across the road, the tannoy said, "There's a lot of people. Take your time, and if you want, you can sit down now."
Mm.
But I can't. I've never broken any law. I'll be arrested.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we all sat down, and then it was very engaging, and some speeches were made. No one was particularly worried because we were clearly not a threat to anyone. And the tannoy said, "We're going to have some democracy here, and we appreciate that you're with your friends. So, you know, don't feel there is no shame if you want to get up and go now. You have done your bit. You've done everything that was asked of you. We encourage you now to put your hand up and walk away if you want to." No one wanted to. It's
All
unanimous.
right. Okay. Yeah.
So it was a little glimpse of power. I hadn't really studied Martin Luther King then, but I was aware of some of his more famous speeches. And
Yeah.
do you remember Drew Dellinger from that
Yeah. I do. Yeah.
Be
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Change? Yeah, I got friendly with him, and he actually wrote about Martin Luther King as the world's first ecological thinker, or
Yeah.
world's first, but how it was in his teachings.
Yeah.
Buried in his teachings. So that was XR. I got, and then the clinching part of that story is went home, and a year later discovered there was one other person in my hometown of Marlow, which, as you said, is true blue and
Yeah.
showing no signs of changing, who was also there on the bridge.
Yeah.
And we got together, had a cup of tea, said, shall we form XR Marlow? It's like, well, there's no point. There might be points. And we had about 150 come to the first meeting. It was
Oh,
a
that's not bad.
beautiful era. And
Yeah.
very crucially, I will stop after this, very crucially, regen was in your introduction, the words
Yeah.
regenerative thinking, regen. It regenerated me. I think it regenerated the people that participated. And they were very happy days
Right.
of realizing that there were other people in your neighborhood, albeit a tiny percentage, that saw the truth of
So
what
the
was happening.
isolation of the singular activist was broken down by being a part of a movement
Yeah,
and doing collective action, as it
I
were.
think so. I think
Yeah.
you've nailed it there. I think the reminder that you're not alone.
Yeah.
Not a
Yeah.
lone
It's
wolf. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And
Mm,
but you pursued that quite extensively. What have been the kind of, because those were like the halcyon days, and
mm,
then there was a massive pushback and
mm.
oppression, in my opinion, of civil disobedience.
Yes.
What sort of were the ramifications for you, and where are you at with protest and actions now?
Yeah, I'm sitting with a small amount of shame that I haven't done prison yet.
Yeah, well,
A good friend has got a T-shirt with one of my friends is in prison, and it's
mm,
I think in this era, there's a website, I can't remember exactly what it's called. It's not political prisoners, but there are a vast number of young men and women who could be our sons and daughters, who are
yeah,
currently actually in prison, and it's like no one knows this. It's
yeah,
incredible. There's an organisation called Defend Our Juries,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
which I was in there from day one,
mm,
because there is an established absolute right, which was not 1066, historical passed down, that juries in courts have to be able to act on their conscience. So
yeah,
if a corrupt judge comes in and says you have to find this person guilty, the 12 people can chat amongst themselves and say, well, he's telling us that, but they're
Yeah.
not. They're clearly not. He's a rich landlord, and so you can still act on your conscience as a.
Yeah.
And this sign was up in the Old Bailey.
Yeah. I remember. Yeah. Yeah.
Trudy Warner, very good friend, had a sign reproducing the Old Bailey, held it outside a courtroom, and was arrested and threatened with imprisonment for doing that.
Yeah.
So a number of, we said we're all Trudy Warner, and before you know it, Defend Our Joys has become a very beautiful thing, because it's got some very bright legal minds in
Yeah.
there in the
Yeah.
mix, and some very brave activists.
Yeah.
And I think it's exactly what you said. It's the I'm not alone.
Yeah.
You think you're a lone voice, and then 1,000 of you show up outside the Royal Courts of Justice in the Strand and sit down in the roads. Normal, healthy, beautiful, loving, caring people. Not anything like what the Daily Mail would want to paint us at.
I think it's very worrying that the language of extremism and terrorism was being misappropriated or misassigned
Yeah.
to civil. But in a way, I think one of the successes of it is that you've got such an oppressive reaction. It shows it's true. Because otherwise, if it wasn't true, those guys wouldn't be being locked up, because they're a threat for stating the truth.
Yeah. Which has always been the case, hasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
I
And
don't
that's
think
not as much civilized and sophisticated and as intelligent and privileged as we think we are. And I think that those disturb the status quo. So
Yes.
they've
Yes.
served a purpose in one way. And if we just move on to the final question, Dave, because we probably haven't done anything like justice to your journey and your insights and what you've seen. But
I'm loving
you just
my case.
mentioned young people
Mm.
starting out today when, sustainability isn't new. Regenerative is kind of becoming a buzzword, somewhat similar to sustainability, but are passionate about the planet and want to do good for the sake of the planet. What advice would you give them? How would you guide them if they came to you for support or wisdom, as it were?
Yeah, such a great question. I'm pausing not for absence of answers, but for choice.
Filtering.
I'll trust myself, because there was an example related to JSO that was actually with a very young sports person. He's still playing.
Just Up Oil. Yeah.
Well, a person in Champions for Earth, who
Oh,
I'm
Champions for Earth.
kind of
Yeah.
kind of mentoring, but there's a
Yeah.
crossover between what he did and said. Because
Mm.
if you remember when Just Stop Oil were doing orange powder on all the big sporting events, I mean, if you wanted to be hated, you wouldn't have come up with a better plan than to
No.
disrupt people's
Yeah.
national game
Yeah.
and the rugby and the cricket and the snooker.
Yeah.
And they did it gracefully. They never actually interfered with anyone's career or with outcomes or anything. It was all knocked on the head very, very quickly.
Yeah.
But one young man was young, and it's the advice. I think it's not quite answering your question, but it's like it happens. I'm just acknowledging that I'm doing that. And their end of it was a discussion we were all having, where he was saying, well, I don't know what I'd do if someone ran onto the game, and he's paid a salary, he's pro, still
Yeah.
covering his identity by not naming the sport. And he wouldn't need me to or want me to. But off his own bat, he said, I've thought about it so much, because it could be career ending. It could, I could
Yeah.
come under attack. I would be vilified and all the rest of it. He said, but I think I've worked it out. If it happened while I was there, you know how footballers take their shirts off.
Yeah.
Take his shirt off and ask the Just Stop Oil person to do the same and swap shirts and walk
Oh,
the
yeah.
field.
Yeah.
And I just thought that is absolute courage and wisdom, and that would be, pardon the pun, a game changer. And he would take a lot of stick for that. But the fact that he'd thought that through and was willing to consider doing that, I think the advice I'd give young people is to look out for the adults. There aren't that many of them. Flipping where are the adults around,
Yeah.
and trust your judgment of who they might be. and they might actually be adults that your parents disapprove of.
Yeah. Well, also something in there about if you've got a deeply felt, heartfelt connection to the planet, is to be creative about how you intervene and stand by your values.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
yeah,
hearing in that example.
yeah. There was a lady, the Be the Change conference we were both at, and I'd forgotten we were
Yeah,
both there, but
yeah.
Frankie, and it was courage, creativity, and clarity.
Frankie Armstrong.
Um, no, although could have been, but Frankie, Frances Ford, something she wrote, How to
Uh,
Survive in a World Gone Mad or something.
yeah,
American,
yeah,
really,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But it was those three, and I adopted those as values.
Say them
Clarity,
again, just for clarity's
yeah,
sake.
clarity,
Yeah.
courage, and creativity. Creativity,
Clarity, courage, and creativity.
yeah.
So those are three watchwords for potential new change makers, young change makers, and activists. So
I
thanks so
think
much, Dave. I've really, really enjoyed interviewing you. You've got such a fantastic story. I hope listeners will benefit from, hearing what's unfolded as all these different trends that you've participated in, and hopefully they'll be inspired by what you've given for the planet. I'm
Thank you
going
so
to
much, Dave.
thank you.